the way that the brokerage system currently is set up, it's every man for themselves, literally every man for themselves. There's very little collaboration between brokers. I'm saying this generally speaking, like there are people obviously that do, like I know a lot of people that do collaborate and stuff, but generally speaking, the way that the system is set up is that you're on your own. Like the idea that we even have a saying cradle to grave for this industry, that meaning that you literally take care of the entire shipment all the way through, is crazy to me. Like there should be more support than that, and there should be more collaboration. And so from my point of view, I think that that's one of the reasons why, like, I don't want to say women aren't successful at brokerages, because they are, but I feel like they would be more successful if brokerages were set up in a different manner.
Welcome into another episode of Everything is Logistics, a podcast for the thinkers in freight. I'm your host, Blythe Milligan, and we are proudly presented by SPI Logistics. And we've got an incredible show for y'all today. We've got Jenn Morris. She is the founder of Ship Happens, and we got a lot of things to talk about today. So, Jenn, welcome to the show, first and foremost.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Now, where are you? Because I know that you travel a lot. So are you living like a digital nomad lifestyle, right?
I am, yeah.
And so where are you currently, I guess, calling in from?
I'm in Gibraltar right now, actually. So
That's
I'm literally
awesome.
like looking out the window, and there's like the giant rock is like right outside my window. It's kind of nice.
Now, what number country is this for you?
45,
Oh my God.
44, something like that. I don't
That is
honestly.
awesome.
I have an app to keep track. I just haven't looked at it in a little while, so I don't know.
Now, have you traveled your whole life like this, or is this something that's kind of maybe like a recent, like, because I guess, with the quote unquote, the digital nomad thing has, been popular for, I don't know, like 5, 7 years now?
Yeah, so like I started traveling. The first time I went international was when I was like 16, and I went to Paris with like school. And then I went to university and I got real poor, so I didn't travel very far at all. A big trip was like I used to go to school across the river from Detroit. So like if we went to Chicago, like that was a big deal. And we would drive, we wouldn't fly. So then I started working, and I had vacation time, and I was that person that literally would stack all of my time together and like take like 3 weeks at a time and just like take off. Um, and so yeah, like probably when I was like 26, I started traveling again quite a bit. On my own, I was traveling alone most of the time, or like with a group or something, like a group tour. And then COVID happened, and I still have a partner, but I had a partner at the time. And after like the second year of lockdowns in Toronto, we were kind of like, we're paying so much for rent. Like, this is crazy. And so we decided to like get in our car, and we drove through the US for like 6 months, like just exploring all different places in the US. We'd like Airbnb and things like that. And so like the plan was to be back in 3 months, and then we just didn't go back at all. And then we were just like, why don't we take this international? So we did 3 months in Portugal, and then we just started moving around Europe quite a bit. So
That's my like dream life. Like I have always wanted to, I for a little while wanted to be the RV people, and I was like, oh well, that maybe was a little short-lived, or maybe I didn't quite, think that through, especially after renting an RV for a few days. The water hookups and the bathroom
yeah,
situation, that was a little like, I'd
there's a
rather
lot of
stay at a
admin
hotel.
involved with that for sure.
Now, how do you travel? Do you just travel by car? Public transport? Like, how are you? I guess what is the logistics of
Yeah.
traveling to different countries? How do you pick a new one?
It's interesting because like we are lucky because we have each other. So like if we go to a new place, like we have a built-in friend already. But there are places, co-livings, which are like essentially if hostel grew up and got a job. And so it's like a bunch of people like us that are traveling and working full time, and there's usually like a dedicated workspace in, like, they're usually quite large houses with dedicated workspace. You have like an ensuite like bedroom and all this space, and you just share like the common areas like the kitchen and living space and whatnot. So we've stayed at a bunch of those, and then we've done Airbnb. And there is some additional logistics a lot of people don't know about when it comes to this life. So like, especially if you're in Europe. So there's an area within Europe that is visa free, like, or not visa free, but border free. So like you can travel around within that area without having to show your passport all the time. The problem is that you have to leave. Like if we're Canadian and US, you can go there for 90 days every 180 days. So like we have to keep track of how many days we're in that region, and then we have to leave that region and go places outside. And the region's very big, like it's most of the EU. So that's why I'm in Gibraltar right now, because it's technically outside of that area. And so I'm here until mid-April, and then we'll have all of our days back and we can go back to Europe, like the
Now,
rest of Europe.
what is a couple more questions and then we'll actually get into
Yeah,
like, I
yeah,
guess,
for sure.
quote unquote, like real logistics, whatever that means. I'm curious, what is the most beautiful place or more, maybe the most interesting place that you've seen on your travels?
Oh, that's such a it's really such a hard question sometimes, because like um
It's
there's
like your
so
favorite
many
child.
beautiful places. Like there's so many places that we've been that are just absolutely like gorgeous and stunning, and it changes every time we go somewhere new. I'm like, "Oh, but maybe here." Like um I would I will say, like, I love Canada a lot, and Canada is absolutely stunning. Like
Mm.
out west of Canada, like we spent a bunch of time out there, and it's it's breathtaking. Like it literally will take your breath away. So I will be, that's so cliche to be like, I love it at home, but like it is beautiful. But I will say that I love being in Spain and France for like food and wine, and like the culture is like unmatched. Like the food is so great. Like if I had to choose off of food, it'd be Spain and
Yeah.
France for sure.
Any concerns about, because I know there's like a bunch of I mean, this is right now, so it probably maybe it didn't exist like when you were there, but there's like a bunch of pushback from people in Spain and that
Hmm.
area of like they don't want any from what I understand, they don't want any UK tourists, but I'm sure, maybe that
Yeah,
applies to.
they I get where they're coming from. I think they're kind of mad at the wrong people, but
Mm.
I definitely see where they're coming from, because it's a lot. Like if you're in Barcelona, for example, in the middle of summer, which we have been, it is like it's almost unlivable. Like if you live there, I get it. Like it's awful. It's so many people. And so like I kind of understand where they're coming from. I think that it's more about like the systems that are in place that maybe need to be addressed.
Mm.
Um, and for us, we try and be really cognizant of the fact that we um, can be part of the problem. Like we're taking up space that maybe wasn't being taken up before. So we'll definitely try and be really local with how we're shopping. We definitely don't go to the touristy areas as much. We'll try and stay in local spaces, and integrate ourselves into that world, and kind of make sure that money is going back to the right areas rather than big conglomerates that don't really need our money. Um, yeah, so it is kind of a double-edged sword. It is a beautiful life, but you do have to be cognizant of like the effect that you might have where you're going. So
Yeah. I love that approach because it's a slightly lesser scale, but like in the state of Florida, where it's a lot of our beaches are being taken over by, private equity and big conglomerates. And, a lot of the local places are rightfully, upset about it. So,
of
there's
course,
that whole sort of, local movement, buy local, shop local. And we try to do that too. But it's just traveling over to Europe, I think it can be a little scary. Like for me, seeing this sort of backlash, and I'm like, well, maybe that's, maybe I don't want to go to Spain anytime soon if they don't want me, maybe, I'll try to go somewhere else. But I love that approach of like, maybe just don't stay in like the super touristy areas and,
yeah.
maybe try to go more local than you typically would.
Yeah, and I think too, the other part is the respect level, and like understanding that you're visiting somebody's home.
Mm.
Like you have to understand that things are not going to be like when you're at home. Like we just came from Serbia. That's where we were prior to this. That's how I ended up chatting with Alex. And like, listen, it was really difficult to get used to the fact that people spoke inside still there. And that's just how it is. And So like my first instinct was kind of to complain about it. And then I was like, no, like I decided to come here and I knew it wasn't going to be like where I'm from. So this is just part of the culture, you know? Um, so it's kind of like embracing wherever you are and realizing that it's not about you, it's about exploring where you're at.
What is okay, for real, last question. What is like one thing that you've eaten and you're like, this is the most incredible thing. I can't wait to maybe try and make this myself or try to, buy it when I'm back home. Or is there anything like that? Or is it really just, you got to be in that country, having that
Ooh.
moment for that meal to be really special?
I mean, there's really nothing like a croissant when you're in France. Like, there is nothing, it's like just the perfect bite sometimes. It's just, I don't know how to explain it. It's really tasty. And then also, I will like second would be like cheeses and meats, like cheeses and cured meats in Spain and in France. It's just like so tasty and so reasonably priced. Like, it's so great. I'm like, yes, love it. I could talk about food all day
Amazing.
if you want to.
I know, it's good. Well, we could just turn this into like a travel and food episode, and I'm sure nobody will be mad. But maybe for okay, so maybe you mentioned Alex, as I was mentioning before we hit record, of how I was listening to you and Alex Bates. I believe his show is, I should probably remember this, another podcast or pod, like
Asset
POD,
asset based
asset
asset based
based.
podcast.
I remember like the POD like being
Hmm.
giant. And so I was like, oh, okay, okay. Because I was on one of his, I guess he had like a female panel
Hmm.
back when he did a previous podcast. And so it's cool to see that, logistics creators, are just continuously making those upgrades.
Hmm.
And listening to that episode with you, I thought it was great, hearing a lot of your different perspectives. Because I've been following your work on LinkedIn for a while. And so
Oh,
being able to listen to, a podcast was really great. So highly recommend, and I'll link to
oh,
it in the
thank you.
show notes for folks who want to check out that episode. But for maybe folks who haven't listened to that episode yet, give us how'd you, what's your spiel of, what's how you got into
Oh,
logistics and all that. Everybody has to answer the question, I guess. And so here
everybody
we
does
are.
it. I mean, it's funny because like I've found this answer so consistent across a lot of people. Like I'd say 80% of people answer with, I did not think I was going to end up here. Like this is not where I thought I was going to end up. I didn't it like when I was growing up, I was in university in the early 2000s, like the beginning of the 2000s. And so like this wasn't like a role that was out there in the world being advertised to me as like a job. And in all honesty, when I graduated university, I still really didn't know what I was going to do. But I was living just across the border in Detroit. I'm actually from Niagara Falls, so like further, closer to Toronto. Um, and somebody in my family got sick, and I had already planned that I wanted to move to Toronto. So I was like, okay, I'll just get whatever job I can get, and then I'll figure it out from there. And the job I happened to get was at CH Robinson. And so and then it turned out that I was really good at it. So I stayed and I was making good money. And like, for better or worse, CH Robinson, at least back then, was like a great training ground to learn a lot about the industry in a very short period of time. Somebody kind of explained it to me as like, oh, it's like being on a moving train and having to figure out how to get on while it's moving still. And I'm like, oh, that's actually exactly showing up in supply chain. Like just something that's going and you just have to figure out your space. Um, so I stayed at CH Robinson for about 9 years ish, something like that. And then I left and I bounced around doing like working at some produce companies because I had specialized in produce transportation at CH Robinson. Um, and then I kind of was like, oh, I think maybe I could do something on my own. So like I kind of had the opportunity to open a small brokerage, which I still run a little bit. It's very small. I only have a few clients, and I specialize in cannabis in Canada. So that happened. And then 3 years ago, after doing a little bit of consulting, I started noticing that like small businesses were I don't want to use the phrase being taken advantage of, but they didn't have a lot of knowledge to be able to make the appropriate decisions or ask the appropriate questions of larger companies that were servicing them. And so I decided to start like making content that was like dumbed down so that people would that weren't in the industry could interact with the industry without feeling at a disadvantage or feeling more confident about their decisions. And it's just kind of evolved from there. I started getting some traction on LinkedIn with a couple of posts that I made more about being a woman in the industry. And it's kind of just taken a life on of its own. So I'm just kind of letting it take me where it takes me.
No, I love that. And you hit on there's a bunch of threads that I want to pull on there. First, when you are what did you find that most, I guess, shippers were struggling with? Or maybe what was an unknown item that they didn't know about that you helped teach them?
Yeah, so interesting, like odd things like, oh, your packaging is considered like oversized packaging. Can you adjust your packaging by this much? And then it'll save you like 70% on your shipping costs. Like, or them paying like crazy amounts of disbursement fees at customs through ocean freight, and them not even realizing that disbursement fees, they don't have to pay them if they don't want to. They could pay the duties at the time and avoid the disbursement fees if they choose to. It's just about more about giving people better understanding of of what's happening so that they can make the choices. Maybe they still pay the disbursement fee, or, you know what I mean, because it's more convenient. But at least they know now like what that fee actually is. What does it mean? What is it for? Because a lot of people were just like, oh, I get this bill and I don't know what half of the things are on here. And I'm like, oh well, let's go through it. Let's so that at least you feel knowledgeable about what you're spending your money on.
Yeah, it's almost like you're helping them with their own audits of like auditing their own transactions and helping them save money, which is, I guess, what a good broker would be doing for someone.
Yeah, just kind of
And
happened.
so you said you have a handful of clients that are cannabis specific. What is different about, I guess, shipping cannabis than any other sort of niche or commodity?
I think it was the fact more about like that it was so weird at the beginning. Like, so legalization in Canada is federal for those that don't know, which means we can ship it, we can put it on a plane if we want to. Like, there's just no, you can do what you want essentially with transportation wise. Um, People even send it through the mail, I think. I don't know that for sure. Don't quote me on that. Um, um, that might be gray market, which is technically not legal. um, but at the beginning, it was like people were so nervous because the product was worth so much money. Like right at the
Mm.
beginning, prices were like really crazy, and like the unique thing about cannabis is like before it was legalized, there was an industry already there. Let's be real. That industry was very well evolved. Of all the like criminal industries, that one was very well evolved. And so when it switched to being legalized, there was a lot of like really gray areas about like how things were being shipped. So like I had when I first started doing it, we were like shipping stuff. There was shipments going in armored trucks and stuff like that, and I'm like, well, this seems a little silly, but okay. They were paying for it. So, and then like we got a little bit further and they switched to regular trucks, but then they had armed guards following them, and it just seemed really like dramatic, to be honest. Because I was like, it's not like there's a sign on the side of this truck that's like cannabis in here, like come and get it. It's kind of like you don't know what trucks have televisions in it as they're going across the country either. So like it just seemed a little bit silly to me, but I do understand the price of the product was very, very high. Now the price of the product has kind of um, regulated itself. It's still high for cargo, if you will, but now it's just shipped on a regular truck, just like normal. There, it is temperature controlled most of the time. Certain things can't be flown because of lithium batteries and things like that, but outside of that,
Oh,
it's
like
just
the
like moving
vapes and stuff.
anything
Hmm.
else. Yeah, it is just like moving anything else. It's just like moving any other specialty item. It's just kind of like you got to know what the product needs. It's very, that's why my background in produce was really helpful, because like produce is a very difficult product to move. And so like having that background gave me a lot of like insight into like, okay, questions I should ask, things I should be on the lookout for, and understanding of this product. And now I really understand the product, so it makes it a lot easier to move.
What about insurance around it? Is that challenging to get, or is it treated like any other commodity?
Mm-mm. It is very challenging. It is really challenging. It's getting easier. I will say that. Like at the beginning, like you could not get insurance for it. It was very wild westy in the fact that like a lot of people's like insurance policies didn't specify yes or no that it was covered. Like it wasn't listed as like an exception that wasn't covered, but like it wasn't listed as something that was. So like a lot of people kind of just like were like, well, we'll just see what happens. Um, and I don't think that there's been any like major situations, knock on wood, at this point, where product needed to be replaced. But now there are more companies that offer that as like a specialty insurance. So now it just becomes essentially the same as high value insurance or insurance for pharmaceuticals. It's kind of very similar.
Oh, that's super interesting because I there's so many hurdles, especially in the US, like, certain states, it's okay, certain cities within
Oh
certain
yeah.
states, it's okay. Like, I think Denver is like a famous example where it's like certain cities in Denver like don't allow the sale for it at all. But then other town you got to drive, 3 miles down the road in order to get it recreationally. Don't ask me how I know
Yeah.
this. But it was challenging. Let's just say that.
Well, and this is why, like, the fact that it's federally legal, well, sorry, federally legal makes it a lot easier to move. It makes the whole industry a lot easier to manage through, because then it just becomes like anything else, right? Becomes like cigarettes, anything that's a more regulated item, cigarettes, pharmaceuticals, things like that.
And so it no longer has to travel in like an armored truck, which is crazy. I didn't
No,
even know
that
that you
was
could
so
call a carrier for an armored
I was
truck.
no, so what was happening was companies like sorry, not pharmaceuticals, cannabis companies, which we refer to as LPs, licensed producers. So they would call like companies like security companies instead. And so that's how I ended up getting the freight in the first place. Was I was working with a security company doing some freight for them separately, like air freight. Like I was doing essentially like little moves from like warehouses to the airport for the things to fly. And then that's how I ended up getting to start doing the cannabis. And it was so funny to me that they were sending things by by armored truck. I'm like, this seems a little overkill, but okay.
Slightly
Um,
excessive.
and yeah, so anyways, but yeah, it was kind of entertaining for sure.
Well, let's switch gears a little bit to your content creation journey because that's originally how I discovered you, and I would love to sort of do a deeper dive into what got you started and how you've kind of found like a really good niche for yourself.
Yeah, I think, listen, I've always been, um, this industry, let's be real, has not always been very welcoming to women. I would argue that it's still not that welcoming. Like it's like I feel like I've been invited to a party that like nobody really wants me at. Um, but when I first started, it was way worse. Like I worked in an office, I was the only woman in the office, and it was uncomfortable. We'll say that. And so I did see a lot of like older women like above me that were not exactly helpful. If anything, they were worse than some of the men. And I don't blame them for that. There's some internalized misogyny there, and there's some things that they need to work through, and how they ended up where they are was a much different journey than mine. I decided though, like I'm not gonna stand by and allow any women to deal with what I dealt with. So my content, when I first started posting on LinkedIn, was around that, because I felt like there were a lot of male voices and I did not see a lot of women. I rarely was interacting with women. It was kind of frustrating, to be honest, because I don't know. It's just I want to talk about housewives sometimes, like who do I talk to about that? Um sorry.
No, I
Um
mean, I just watched this season of Temptation Island, and I'm just
Yeah,
looking
like
for somebody to
who do I
have.
talk to about these things? I need to discuss Love is Blind. Who can I talk to? None of these people. They're all talking about football. What? I don't care. No offense. I don't care about football. And that's fine. I love that for them. Love that. But I need a place where I can like, talk about work and talk about things that I enjoy. And so like that was my kind of the thing that started happening. I started making posts about like what it was like being a woman in the industry. I started getting a lot of traction. I remember the post that kind of kicked off a lot, and it was I did 10 names that I've been called by male colleagues in our industry, and it kicked off for some interesting reasons. Like a lot of women were like, "Oh yeah, like I've been on blah 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 all these things," and but some of the men were like, "Oh," it came off very like not all men, and I was like, that's not the point. And so like it was just such an interesting conversation that started, and I was like, well, I'm gonna kind of lean into this, and I started seeking out other women that were in the industry, whether they be content creators or just other women that were very vocal on LinkedIn. And I started really connecting with a lot of them. And then last fall was when I decided to start doing the Gorgeous Girls in Supply Chain posts. And, you know, like I was like, I wanted a place where women could like talk about themselves because like we get kind of, I don't know, told to be humble all the time. And I just am like, no, I want women to be able to stand up and be like, look at my accomplishments, look at the things that I've done. This is what I think about this industry. And so like the questions range from anything from like, do you like hot coffee or cold coffee, to like, what do you think is a problem in our industry? And if you had enough power or money, how would you change it? And so I've gotten a lot of feedback of people saying like they like how like diverse the questions are. And so I don't know, I'm excited to see where it goes and what happens with it. I'm really flattered that you knew who I was. To be honest, I tried to connect with you at Manifest, but you got swarmed after one of the things, and I was like, okay, well, I'll catch up with her later.
Manifest is so I love it, but you're right. It's I have to go hide in the bathrooms at times just because it's
Yeah, it was
I
a
need
little
to.
crazy.
But I wish we would have connected. I didn't know that you went there. I just assumed with all your travels that maybe conferences are kind of like less of a priority because I personally, side note, struggle with that of like the places I really want to see. Like that sounds a lot like the places that you're visiting versus conferences, and I'm like, how do I walk this fine
Well,
line? It seems like
You
you've
should
done
come
it.
to Break Bulk. You should come to Break Bulk next month. Or
Where's that
sorry,
one
in
at?
May in Rotterdam in
Oh,
the
just
Netherlands.
like twist my arm, like of course, like that's
Come.
and that's where I think like more I want to focus is like and that side note, of
Yeah,
course,
yeah.
but back to your interviews with these women. I'm curious, like what's been some of your favorite answers from those questions that you've been asking?
Honestly, it's I so I'll tell you how I do. I don't interview them like this. I don't do that because it's very difficult to kind of find the amount of time and energy for people for that. So I
Mhm.
decided because it is a written item and I want the women to be able to speak in their own words and be able to like share their story the way they would want to share it. I do it as like a Google form actually, and it gives them they don't feel rushed. They can think about their answers, they can put it in their own words. And honestly, like it is, I get so excited when I see that like email come in from Google Forms being like, somebody's filled it out. I'm like, pause everything. I'm going to read that one right now. Because like they're all so diverse, but yet still have so much things in common, like from like how people like to decompress. There's a lot of reading, a lot a lot of like hanging out with family and stuff like that, and a lot of like yoga, meditation, or running. One of those three is always in the list. And then like people talking about how they got into the industry, like there's always like it's one of two ways. Either they've been in it their whole career or they like stumbled upon it and ended up and they're like super happy they found it. And so like I don't know if there's like a favorite answer I have. I think it's more I love the fact that it like I feel super special that I get to read it first before everybody else. And I feel really special each which like I almost feel like I get like a bigger connection with each woman when I read their answers. So yeah, so if any of them are listening, you're all my BFFs. So
Everyone is the favorite child
yeah,
because you can't
I
pick
mean,
a favorite.
because they're all so amazing. Like they all like really bring something special to the table. And so like it's it's just like because I don't just do like super popular people, if you will, or like people with a lot of following or people that are CEOs and stuff. Like I'll if I happen to like see somebody like make a comment on one of my posts and it's a woman and it's like a really interesting comment, I'll like ask her, "Do you want to be on this?" And like some of them are just like so dumbfounded that I'm asking them, and I'm like, "No, you deserve to be heard too."
I love that because the in the trenches stories are a lot of times so much more interesting, and I
Hmm.
think that for just especially with like the level I guess of conversations of people that I get to talk to, I use this podcast as a learning experience, but a
Oh
lot
yeah.
of the I guess the rawness because a lot of executives are very much like media trained and they know how to I know to
Mhm.
ask a question, an alley loop and they're going to dunk it, but then there's the other stories of like the real, the raw, the front lines, the people who are, talking to customers and drivers
Yeah.
every single day. Those are a lot of the times the cooler stories because they can be a little bit more unfiltered, I think.
Yeah, and I like that. I try and be that way myself. Like I've been on a few podcasts now, but I still half the time I leave the podcast being like, "What did I say? I have no idea. We'll see when it comes out." It's like a surprise for me too.
Same. I write down, I keep a post-it like next to the side of like anytime that someone is saying like something interesting, just so I can remember it and be able to go back and reference it for the show notes. Otherwise, I would forget, like, because it's just,
Totally.
I
I
think
get
it's
it.
just the nature of the industry or the nature of
Yeah.
my brain that I can't hold a memory for longer than an hour.
I mean, I get that.
Okay, so let's talk. And for a lot of your content, so you handle it on LinkedIn first, or how do you think about your content strategy, or is it really a thought?
The
Do you
strategy.
put like planning behind it? Like,
So I don't have a lot of planning, so I don't when it comes to LinkedIn, like whatever I'm typing, it's been typed that day. Like if I post something, I it's not planned. I don't post every day either. Sometimes I'll post twice in a day, sometimes I won't post for 3 days because it's like I don't have anything to say. I'm not interesting all the time. Anybody, you know what I mean? Like I that's the one thing I kind of do hate about social media is the way the algorithms work. They're like, you have to post every day and blah blah blah. And I'm like, nobody is that interesting. I'm sorry. I just have to say it. Nobody is that interesting. I have days where like all I do is sit on the couch and watch Housewives, like and that's I'm okay with that. Um, but I like what am I going to post out of that? What I learned watching how two women rip each other apart on television. Like I no, I'm not doing that. Um, but when it comes to the blog, I at least have like a very loose plan of like the goal is to well definitely the gorgeous girls series every 2 weeks on a Tuesday without fail. That's the one thing that I'm like, okay, will not miss that at all. And then at the opposite weeks is when I send out my newsletter. I only send out my newsletter every twice a month because I know everybody's inboxes are wild. um, and then and then in between, I try and do 2 to 3 posts in between there, whatever they are. It could be anything. It could be like, oh, I was on this podcast and here's a post link to that. Like I was on the Postal Hub with a guy named Ian a few weeks ago, which was actually really fun. It was kind of weird to just talk about postal service, but and then yeah, and then with posts and stuff, it's kind of like whatever happens throughout the day or throughout my week. And my notes app is a wild place, let me tell you. There's everything from like the groceries I might need to get to like random quotes that I really don't remember why I wrote them in there to like post ideas that I'm like, okay, I kind of remember that plan. Um, there are a lot of times where I'll like whip out my notes app while I've had a few glasses of wine at a bar somewhere, and I'm like, those notes are not super helpful, to be honest. It just I'm just kind of like, why did I write in chicken? We'll have to revisit that another time.
Yeah, I think the Notes app is definitely if it's not chaotic, then I don't think that you're really maybe a truly creative person because your Notes app is where everything like conferences,
Yeah,
ideas that
everything.
I'm thinking of, everything just goes in there, and then it's a hellhole trying to I guess make sense of it at a later date.
Yeah, I've tried the one thing that I've started doing, which is become a bit smarter, is like I'll go once a month at least. I go through my notes app and like I get rid of especially the stuff that clearly does not make any sense. Or like old grocery lists because I leave them in there. I don't know, it's really weird. But I do that once a month, and that has definitely helped with the craziness of the notes app. It's not perfect, but it helps.
No, that's a good tip. I might steal that because it's just an endless abyss right now of just notes, and I don't know how to make them. I do know how. It's just I'm avoiding it, and that's a story for another day, I guess.
It's fair. That's
Well,
another podcast.
right. How to organize all of my head, which is very challenging, and I don't even want to. I don't think. Okay, so what if with your content creation journey and the benefits that you've seen from it? What advice would you give maybe to other founders or other folks in logistics that they kind of want to start doing the same thing you've done?
I think like the biggest like advice that I would give people is like just like, and it sounds so cliche, but like be authentic, like be who you are, because like it's either going to catch or it's not. Like it's not everybody can do this. I will say that. I want to be very clear because you do have to have a pretty thick skin. People are going to say shit about you. People are going to send you DMs that are not very nice. Like it's just whatever. Um, but you kind of you have to just figure out who you are and what you want to share with people, and then your opinions are just that. They're your opinions, and people for some reason are interested in hearing about them. So put them out there and just stand by them. Like don't let anybody push back on you if it's not valid. So sometimes I am known to change my mind. Not often, but sometimes. But like, there's a difference to me of like backing down and changing your mind because you've been presented new information.
Mm.
So like for me, like I don't back down on the fact that I think that women can make this industry better. Like there's no question in my mind. I think that that is common sense in my mind. But like if somebody comes to me and I'm talking about something in the industry that's like controversial, for example, if somebody brings me new information that I don't know, maybe that'll adjust my viewpoint on that thing. That's totally fair. But I think a lot of the times people don't want to rock the boat or are scared of losing business, and I get that because like I'm in a little bit of a unique position because my other business, I run that too. So like I don't have anybody to answer to. So I understand when because I do get people messaging me asking like, "Hey, like how do I share without like getting in trouble at work?" And I'm like, I have no idea what to tell you because, because I'm pretty sure I'd get fired for half of the things that I put out there. So, um, but I will say like you've got to really, I think the most people that are really successful, especially on LinkedIn, they're themselves. They are super authentic and they just share what they think. And I think that that's great. Honestly, we need more of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you say, because people are going to find out, like if they meet you in person, if they,
Yeah.
do business with you, maybe, because I think that's ultimately the goal of like putting content out on LinkedIn, because otherwise, what are we all doing there? But the easiest app to delete if it wasn't for business purposes.
Yeah.
All social media, just really in general, if it wasn't for business purposes, I would delete them all. But each of them kind of has their place. But I think to your point, like both you and I are in very lucky positions, and that we can say what we want when we want. without that fear of, a boss coming over and,
Hmm.
tapping your desk and being like, we need to have a conversation about this. And I've
Yeah.
even heard of like some other men and women alike that they are discouraged from posting because their bosses don't want them getting extra attention versus the company getting attention. And so there's still kind of
Yeah.
like that old school mindset of,
Yeah.
you're our property. You're don't promote yourself because you're going to be here forever, and don't try to get a better opportunity. And so I think there's a little bit of that too.
I think that's so short-sighted though, because like in all honesty, like if I have an employee and they're getting a lot of traction and a lot of interactions on LinkedIn or wherever, and they're talking positively about my business because they're happy, then I shouldn't have a problem with that. I think the people that have a problem with that recognize that their employees are probably not happy.
Yeah, facts.
Just me saying what I think. Just me saying what I think again. Look out, everyone.
Well, so I was listening to another show with you on it, and you were on with Tim Dooner from What the Truck about a
Hmm.
year ago, and there were some
Hmm.
really interesting numbers that y'all were saying. I think Dooner said 41% of the industry are women, while only 15 to 20% hold executive positions.
Yeah.
Have you seen that improving, or kind of just staying stagnant, or maybe not improving at all?
I think I I think it's slightly improving. When people ask me this question, though, I do have a slightly different answer because people will sometimes ask, like, have you seen women in this industry improve? And what I have seen is that the women in this industry are so fiercely supportive of each other now. It's so, just makes me so happy. Like, whenever I see like women sticking up for each other or women like amplifying each other's voices and things like that, like it's so much more prevalent now than it was before. Like when I was first starting in the industry, it was a lot of like women kind of pushed, like holding each other back, to be honest, like because we all saw there was only one seat at the table that had a woman at it and we are like all vying for that one seat, right? And now I think we've all recognized like, oh, we're not competing with each other. We're like, quote unquote, competing with the men that are all around that table now. And so the more we support each other, the more we can like pull each other up to the table too. So I think that's the part of the industry that I'm super happy to see and to be a part of that movement because I think when women are supportive of each other, like the sky's the limit, to be honest.
Yeah, when I worked at an asset-based brokerage, I think there was only one female broker. I'm trying to think back, maybe 2, but it was interesting looking back on sort of the makeup of the office where accounting was pretty much all women. And then
Hmm.
the brokerage floor we had one woman on the brokerage floor. She spoke Russian. And so she was, talking to all the Russian drivers that would call in, or the Ukrainian drivers that would call in. And then there was another woman, but she worked more on the pricing side. But I'm curious as to why more women don't get involved well, I know the reason why I wouldn't, but I'm curious as a female broker, why don't you think more women want to be involved in that role?
I mean, speaking from experience, it's not easy. And and in reality, like women by nature are more collaborative
Mm.
and empathetic. And the way that the brokerage system currently is set up, it's every man for themselves, literally every man for themselves. There's very little collaboration between brokers. I'm saying this generally speaking, like there are people obviously that do, like I know a lot of people that do collaborate and stuff, but generally speaking, the way that the system is set up is that you're on your own. Like the idea that we even have a saying cradle to grave for this industry, that meaning that you literally take care of the entire shipment all the way through, is crazy to me. Like there should be more support than that and there should be more collaboration. And so from my point of view, I think that that's one of the reasons why, like, I don't want to say women aren't successful at brokerages because they are, but I feel like they would be more successful if brokerages were set up in a different manner.
Hmm. And you mean like Because typically especially with the brokerage that I worked at, I was an executive assistant there. So I was next to all of the, I guess, hiring process, but I wasn't actively involved in, any of their training. But essentially what we would do is we would recruit people from the local college and sit them in a seat and hand them all of the cold leads and, smile and dial. I've always that's always really turned me off from that
Mhm.
position itself. And I'm wondering if is that sort of the structure that you're talking about that maybe should be adjusted, or
Yeah,
what
like
other, I guess, structural ways could brokerages
yeah,
help
I
recruit
think
more women?
yeah, I think listen, like the smile and dial thing is crazy to me. Like
Same.
it's wildly inefficient. Like
Right.
I'm like I just it's crazy. And especially with technology the way that it is right now, like why aren't people taking advantage of like digital marketing and actually like qualifying having qualified leads come in like coming in instead of dialing out? Like it's so silly. Like I don't mean to say it that way, that sounds so condescending, but like for me, like I even when I was working at a brokerage, like I did not do smile and dial. I refused. Sorry. I'm
Good.
like I just was like, no. And I've met other women that are in that position that they also refuse to do it. And they
Oh,
found other
interesting.
ways to bring in their business. And a lot of them are using LinkedIn. And it's funny because like I feel like they go out and build these communities. So then, for example, if I hear of somebody in the States that needs some flatbed help needs a flatbed, then I know who I can like refer somebody to them. And it's going to be a woman because I know from being online on LinkedIn who does that business, you know? And so like I think that some of these women are like really kind of turning the system on its head and finding a different way around that world. I hope that brokerages start to see the value in like using the tools that they have at their disposal that they've been ignoring.
Is there any other tools, I guess, maybe besides LinkedIn that, women kind of excel at when it comes to freight brokerage and sales and in that regard that
I
are
mean, I've
is maybe a little bit different than men?
I mean, I've seen a few on TikTok, to be honest. There are a lot of drivers on TikTok, which I find fascinating. I love following the drivers on TikTok. But that's also like a great way to get carriers as well. Like if like you reach out to somebody on TikTok, like that's an option. I got a carrier one time through 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 Instagram because I just happened to be following their page and they had some fun like stuff that they had put up, and then I started using them a few years ago and I still use them now.
That's
Um,
awesome.
yeah, I think and then I think on top of it, like there are I think that brokerages do a really terrible job of training. Like I think there is no training in a lot of brokerages. Again, speaking generally, I think that a good brokerage will train their brokers to add value outside of just finding a truck.
Hmm.
Because literally, like anyone can go out and find you a truck. Like, but like, why should the shipper shouldn't have to call you every day to find the same truck every day? Like that's silly. Like something is amiss there. I find I've there used to be a company we worked with when I was doing transportation at CH Robinson, and they would call us every day with a list of shipments, and it was crazy. It was always the same list. Like the list very rarely changed. And I finally said to them, I'm like, why don't you just let me like these 5 loads are always the same every day. So why don't you just let me get you trucks, those same 5 trucks every day, and we'll say that the rates between this and this because it's always between this and this. And they were like, well, why would we do that? And I was like, because it save you a ton of time.
Yeah.
Like I'm like, am I speaking Greek? I don't understand. And so he's like, you know what? He's like, we'll try that for a week. And like we did it for a week. And after the week was up, he's like, I was able to leave early 2 days this week. And I was like, right. You're welcome. And so like that's the thing, like teaching new brokers to like recognize patterns and see where they can like combined shipment, whatever the thing might be. But like, there has to be more than just, I found you a truck. There has to be more than that, because there's not a lot, that's not something to build a career on.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like you can differentiate yourself very much by not offering them maybe like a higher level of problem solving.
Right.
And so I kind of want to there was another strong opinion that you had that I love,
Okay.
and I share this opinion, and that's the anti-meeting stance. I
Oh yeah.
avoid meetings like Jon Snow when he's pulling out a sword and there's all the horses like running towards him. That's me like
It's
avoiding
like,
all of the
bye.
meetings as much as possible. For folks who may not have read that, give us, I guess, a high level overview of your stance on meetings.
I listen, there are meetings that are necessary, of course. That's fair. I get that. But there are people that I know that are literally like 3 days a week are just full meetings from 8 in the morning till 5 p.m. And I'm like, how do you get anything done? Like, what are you doing in these meetings? I don't understand. Like, I just don't get it. Cause like for me, like if my clients are happy, they don't want to hear from me. They don't care. Is everything moving? Is everything delivering? Great. Don't need to talk to you. Like, and that's a great relationship. You get an email from me on Christmas saying Merry Christmas, and we're all happy for the next year. Like it's fantastic. But and then the only times that I'm really doing meetings is things like this, or if I somebody has booked time with me to be like, I want to discuss my transportation because I don't understand where I'm going wrong. And in
Mhm.
that scenario, I'm like, yes, this is a great thing to have a meeting about. But I think when we first started with like the pandemic and everybody started working from home, I think people lost that little bit of like where you would just pop by somebody's desk to like clarify or ask a question. Now that's become a full meeting. No, just call them. Just call them. I don't why are we getting on it? Why are we setting up a full meeting so that you can like ask me one question? That's crazy. And I think that also in our work lives now, people have gotten to the point where it's like almost like they're trying to justify their existence. And the more meetings that you have, the more justified your position is. And that is also really silly to me because I need you to produce something. If I'm an employer and I need you to produce something, every hour that you're in a meeting is just costing me money. It's not making me any money. Unless you happen to close a deal on every single meeting that you're in, which I highly doubt, you're just costing me money. And
Yes.
yeah, silly.
100%. And I think the default to your point, that the default to a meeting instead of just one I guess phrasing of how I understand when people want to book a meeting is them trying to figure it out and using that meeting and your time as a space to figure out the thoughts
Hmm.
in their own head. And instead of doing that, you should instead make a meeting goal oriented. And
Yeah,
if it's not goal oriented and everyone that is in on that meeting is responsible for that goal, then don't have it. And so that's sort of like I guess the mindset of what I'm trying to, just put up that
yeah.
barrier because it's so difficult. I have a document saved like bookmarked on how to politely say no to a meeting and it's
I love
really
that.
challenging for
It is
me
hard. It
to
is
say
hard.
no.
It is hard to say no, and I totally get that. And I think one of the things that I implemented very early on, I try not to have meetings on Mondays and Fridays. And then also, if somebody sends me a meeting request with no agenda, it's an immediate no. No with no response either, like just full on no. And then I don't even respond, and then I wait for them to email me and ask me why I said no, and I'll be like, there was no agenda. How do I know what to prepare and what to be ready for?
Oh, I
Oh,
love
I
that.
didn't realize you wanted an agenda. Every meeting should have an agenda. What do you mean you didn't know?
See, that's the default that people are just so used to just throwing a meeting on your calendar, and I think that is
100%.
so rude to just put an
That
invite
too.
on someone's calendar and not ask me for
No, no,
I
no, 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 no.
detest it.
No, no, no. No. That one person got so defensive when I said like, no, I blocked them too. No, get away from me. What are you doing? That's like running up to somebody on the street and being like, we're gonna talk. No, what are you, sir? Calm down.
And that's, I think, another just thing of beauty of when you work for yourself, like you can make those rules and it's okay. And if people want to do business with you and know those rules, then that's, kind of what it is. But
Mhm.
you don't have a right to a response or my time. And that's kind of the way I see it, is that
100%.
it hopefully it's a mutually, and I don't want this to kind I guess, maybe come off as like condescending or whatever, but I'm a one woman business and I have
Mhm.
contractors that I work with, of course, that help me out a ton. But
Same.
the every 30 minutes to an hour of a meeting that I spend with you, if it's not leading or, revenue producing, then it's not worth my time. And
Well,
that's how I try
yeah.
to see it.
Well, and there's something to be said about like one, yes, my time is valuable because as you said, you're a one woman show, so am I. And like I'm running two businesses and I don't have time to sit down and meet with everyone all the time. Like it's just not possible. So yeah, it's a
Have
hard
you
no.
tried any kind of, and this is just me spitballing here because this is things that we're currently trying to experiment with, but have you experimented with any kind of like customer service type roles where it's like, see if you can answer the question yourself and this documentation, or here's an AI chat bot, that can answer, a lot of your questions. Have you experimented with any of that kind of stuff, like trying to pre-qualify them before they are able to book a meeting?
Yeah, I haven't yet. I do make it very clear in like I have a Calendly invite that first of all that is not in my I think that people put it in their signature. Big mistake. Don't do that.
Oof.
Unless you're in sales, maybe, but like nah, that is closely guarded for me.
Yes.
So like
Same.
people have to ask me for a meeting and tell me why they want a meeting before I even give them the Calendly invite. And then on my Calendly invite, they can only get 45 minutes, first of all, and only Tuesday through Thursday. And it also says in the meeting invite, please, like it's, how you can have like the mandatory fields. Like one of the mandatory fields is like, please explain in at least this many words how much, like, or what you are looking to get out of this call. And then that gives me a lot more to go off of. And then if they have not given me enough in that, then I'll send them an email back being like, your meeting is tentatively agreed to. However, I need you to answer this question and this question. And then it makes it a lot easier. And in all honesty, it makes the meeting a lot more productive. So, like, it's in their best interest too. So,
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense, especially putting it on them to kind of figure out your brain before we get on this call so we can hit the ground running and not spend,
mhm.
the first, 15 minutes trying to diagnose what the issue is. Come in with the issue so I can come in best prepared as well. I really like that approach. I might steal that. Or steal it. I don't know if what's the right phrasing for it, but I think that's a really great idea.
Adopt. You're going to
Yeah,
adopt it.
there we go.
That's like the nice way of saying I'm going to borrow that idea.
Now
Adopt
another
that
one,
strategy.
right? Now there's speaking, I guess, of like forms that you have people fill out, because for my show I have people fill out, and this is a very like recent addition to the flow, but
Mhm.
I ask people like, what are three strong opinions or philosophies that you have that you want to talk about,
It's a
and
great
one of
idea, by
those
the
that
way.
you can adopt it too if you want. It's women helping women, right?
For sure.
Now, one of those answers that you gave was helping with like the boring stuff of like processes and creating more profit through systems. Can you kind of give us what
Mhm.
the, I guess, the thought process behind the profit through
I
process or profit through systems?
I think, listen, like I working in logistics, like it's always like, oh, we need to save money. So rates, 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 better rates, better rates, better rates. I'm like, rates can only go down so far. Like you can't keep using rates as a way to save money. And listen, most companies have inefficiencies that are costing them money, especially ones that are shipping product. And so companies, a lot of them need to step back and kind of be like, okay, but where is their money just lying on the ground that we can just go and pick up? Like there was detention is a great example, actually. There is, first of all, two things about detention. One, pay your driver's detention. straight up. Two, you can prevent that. So there a quick story. When I was back working at CH Robinson, there was a company that we had as a client, and they had multiple warehouses across Canada. And we were doing shipments from Toronto to Ottawa. And there was a warehouse in Ottawa. It was one of their smaller warehouses, and we were shipping paper products like toilet paper, paper towels, that kind of thing. They would send 2 or 3 loads a day, every day. Something happened and they started having issues of not having any space in the warehouse in Ottawa. So we had trucks sitting there for days, and they were still having us pick up. And it's not a long drive. It's like a 1 day drive. Not even. It's like a 5 hour drive. And so finally I just went to her and I was like, I'm not picking up anymore. And she's like, what do you mean? She's like, do you not have any trucks? I'm like, I have plenty of trucks. They're all sitting at your facility. And she's like, well, but they keep saying that they don't have any product. I'm like, tell them to look outside. Like, there's plenty. So essentially, like, what was happening, there was a disconnect between the operation of like ordering the product and then the clarity of like the product was actually fulfilled and was just sitting there outside. And so like I luckily saw that happening and finally stood up and was like, we're not doing this anymore. The thing is, they were paying like $300 a day for each of those trucks or those trailers. It was just the trailers at that point, the trailers to just be sitting there. And I'm like, you're wasting money and you keep wanting to add to the pile. Like, this is crazy. And so I think that there's a lot of those things that go on that there's I truly advocate for the fact that I think there should be a lot more cross um, training in larger companies. Like
Hmm.
people that work in supply chain should be working in buying, and well, buying is part of supply chain. People in logistics should be working in buying. People that are doing like the warehousing organization should be working with the logistics. Like there should be a lot more like integration, but a lot of companies have these silos and those silos are costing them money. And so from my perspective, there's a lot of places where there's dollars just kind of sitting around that could be easily acquired. I don't know.
No, I think it makes perfect sense because that was a whole reason, why I started the company Cargo Rex. I'm like, we have so many silos. I didn't realize how bad it was until I started this podcast and,
Mhm.
using it as an educational resource to educate myself outside of just asset-based brokerage and just learning about different warehousing and maritime and all these different silos, and it's incredible how much of that exists, and then you just keep drilling down into
Yeah.
companies and different segments and commodities, and the waste is just kind of everywhere. And
Yeah.
I don't know why people don't want to address these things. As a business owner, I want to address my leaky faucets everywhere. I don't know, maybe they just become more complicated to deal with as you grow, as you
I
get larger.
I mean, I do have a theory about that. My theory is that everybody's CYAing and then saying there's no actual problem because nobody's willing to take accountability for that problem coming up. And I'm like, it reminds me of situations where like a truck is late and I'm like, and then you have to reorganize the appointment and all these things. There's a problem that needs to be solved first before we figure out why it happened. And I think
Hmm.
that that's kind of the issue when it comes to like the waste in supply chain. People are so concerned with figuring out who to blame first rather than fixing the actual problem. And I think that that's where there's some issues. Like even at Manifest, like I learned about like a lot more about warehousing. I knew nothing about warehousing until I went there. A whole new world.
Right.
Um, and I learned about like that stat about 4 hours or more to find a missing item in a warehouse on average. And I'm like, that's a half of somebody's day. Like, and just doing some quick math in my head, I'm like, that's a lot of money because that every time something goes missing, it could take that long. Like, and this is where like, okay, this is where technology should step in. You can have much better there's multiple companies that were at Manifest that have the capability of giving you real time inventory and up to date inventory. And so like those are the things where it's like, okay, like you need to really start adopting more of this reasonable technology than like the fancy bell and whistle technology. Like in my mind, I prefer to see somebody adopt that kind of technology than the pricing technology in my mind, because I feel like one is going to solve a problem and the other one may potentially create problems down the line.
Yeah, it could be like a whack-a-mole, and you
Hmm.
are just adding more problems to the mix when you could be solving your own internal problems, saving money, and then figuring out, where this
Correct.
technology makes the most sense.
100%.
Um, yeah, and I think Manifest is it's a great example of like a conference that you go to, and if you've worked in one of those silos, like you kind of don't know. I didn't know until I went to my first Manifest, and I saw like really like the whole logistics process under
Hmm.
one roof, and that was warehousing. I think is just one of the most like fascinating parts of it. We
Same.
just dropped an episode yesterday, and it was talking about how 90% of the US based warehouses don't have any kind of robotics, and got to talk
Wow.
with Kevin Lawton of the New Warehouse podcast. Great podcast, by the way. And he was saying that a lot of some of these like drone inventory count technologies can really like
Hmm.
work 24/7 and help aid in the process of your work day to day within a warehouse. But also the interesting aspect of like the psychological I guess training that has to go on with warehouse
Yeah.
workers, and trying to help them see like a drone or a robot is like there to help you instead of like take your job, which is another like fascinating aspect to it.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's I echo that statement where it's warehousing and just in general, I think is interesting. But to your point, figuring out what those processes are first can help you get there faster and not
Yep.
create a whole bunch of more problems. Okay, I don't want to take up too much of your time because I know that we're a little bit over here. But
That's
I'm
okay.
I'm good to keep going because I got a
Yeah,
couple
yeah,
like
I've got plenty of time.
okay, perfect,
It's
awesome.
like it's five o'clock here, so
Oh, I meant to ask that earlier.
I get a
What
cocktail.
time
I
is
don't
it?
know.
It's literally 5 p.m. somewhere.
It
The
is
famous
5 p.m.
song goes.
somewhere.
Or it's 5 o'clock somewhere. That'll kill me.
Yeah.
Okay. Which reality show is most relevant to logistics?
Oh, that's a good question. Oh my God, I have one
I know.
answer that's like super offensive, and then I have another answer that
Let's
is
hear them
like
both.
less offensive. Traders. I don't know if you've ever seen that show.
I'm a big challenge fan, and a few of the people from the challenge have gone on
Yes.
traders and like won it. So Johnny Bananas, CT,
Yeah.
Trishelle, I think. So I'm a
Yeah.
big
So
challenge fan.
traders is one that comes to mind as an option.
And for folks who may not know, there's a lot of with the challenge in particular. It's physical activities. It's a lot of mind game, not mind game, but kind of mind games,
Amazing mind games.
puzzles, things like that. But then there's also like the political, forming ties and relationships, and so it makes sense while some of those people who have been on the challenge for like 10, 20 years go over to traders, and traders
Hmm.
is there's a lot of politicking, right?
I mean, I think that's why some of the housewives do so well as well, because they just know how to just stir the pot. But I think the other one I would probably say like a little bit less like offensive is like The Amazing Race. It's
Mm.
very like there is logistics involved in that. It's kind of on the nose, but the fact of like that every day is very different. Things happen, you don't know what's going to happen next. Like that kind of vibe is very logistics coded, if you will.
That makes sense. Okay, if there was a reality show filmed at a logistics company, which company should it be?
Oh god. Oh no.
That sounds like a thought, but maybe I have
I
one. I
think
think an easy answer for me, and it's just based off like my YouTube comments. TQL.
that's what I was gonna say. I was
Drivers
gonna
do
say
not like TQL.
drivers don't like TQL. What I would like to see is kind of like a conglomerate of like a few. So like you have TQL and CH Robinson and maybe like Coyote, and like the interactions between all of them and like the people moving from one company to the other and like the loafers with no socks situation happening all the time. Yeah, I think it'd be a great show. It'd be mostly men, to be honest, but
Patagonia vest everywhere.
oh god, so many Patagonia vests, lots of khakis,
And Zin just
and
gross.
Zin everywhere,
Gross.
all over the place. I don't know if you saw. It's funny that you asked that question because I literally made a post about that, kind of about that yesterday. It was a meme that it was like logistic bro starter pack, and then like gorgeous girls in logistics starter pack, and the bros one was like Zin, Red Bull, socks, shoes with no socks. I find that so offensive. Sorry, everyone.
It's definitely I don't know why. Maybe it's just a cultural thing. I don't know why they all
I feel like it's
do
very
it.
Midwest.
It's in the South too. So I don't
Oh,
know
I
what
don't
it
know.
is.
It's
The
Friday.
brokerage, the two brokerages that I worked at, it was very much it was a lot of the same people because the first one I worked at closed down. And so when they all went and joined the new company, it was a lot of the same people that went to the new company too. But it was very much it's like a shared culture. Ping pong table in the back,
Yeah.
pizza every Friday. So hopefully, cracking beers at 4 p.m. on Fridays. Probably get you in trouble with the in-house lawyers or, something like that. Yeah, I was the executive assistant that had to order all those things for everyone. So if it was
If I had a female focused brokerage, it'd look way different than that.
oh, what would Friday afternoons look like if it was a female brokerage?
Okay, well, obviously rosé. Obviously. Everyone would have their own like nice little cup. We would all like kind of hang out and talk shit about the other companies. I think it'd be great, honestly.
It would tie very nicely
We'd
into a
have
good
like
reality show.
we'd have like a really nice kitchen too, like with all the stuff that we need to make really fancy coffees. We'd have like one of those super awesome like ice drawers that you see on TikTok. I think we'd have that too. And
Yeah.
like everybody would get like a little welcome package when they came. They'd get like a Laneige or like a Longchamp bag with like a bunch of like stuff that you need to get you through the day. No
Eye
Zin.
mask.
Zin would be banned.
Yeah, get it out of here. You could handle the cannabis shipping so that we would be fine there.
Yes.
Um, we would have the drinks, we would have the entertainment covered.
Yeah.
All the
It'd be great.
TVs instead of like news and sports would just be reruns of, Bravo TV
Yeah,
on all
yeah.
day.
Love that.
Yeah.
Oh, and once a week blowouts.
Yeah. I mean, how could you turn that down?
I
Maybe
think I
bringing in
I
like a little area of the office that's just for blowouts and like getting a pedicure or maybe like
yeah,
massage chairs.
love
I feel
that.
like a lot of men would want to work there too if they could have access to those.
I think that would be a really we'd have the best female led sales team. Like we would have all the best people. I
I
think we
think
just
this is
did a I think we just did a business plan, to be
yeah,
honest.
it sounds like we're mapping it out pretty well. It sounds like the best Friday at a brokerage that I've ever, participated in. Much better than like hot dogs or like KFC that's brought
Oh
into
no.
or pizza
No.
or
We'd have sushi.
elevated brokerage, but
Elevated. Everything
elevated. Yeah.
elevated. Brokerage, but make it better.
Awesome. Well, I think that's kind of a yeah. That was the kind of like the last few questions that I had. Anything else that you feel like is important to mention that we haven't already talked about?
Don't think so. I've loved this. This has been so great. I just want people to recognize that if you don't have women in your office, if you have very few women on your leadership team, you should definitely look inward because there is a problem. And I think that you'll be pleasantly surprised if you add more women to your workforce and to your team and to your executive team. I think you'll see a lot of positive changes.
Well said, and I think that's a perfect place to end this conversation. Jen, where can I send folks? Where can they find you online? Follow your work, subscribe to the blog, all that good stuff.
Yeah. So my LinkedIn, I'll give you my LinkedIn link. That has a link that will take you to get my newsletter that comes out twice a month. And then I also have an Instagram account called When Ship Happens. So you can catch me on there.
Perfect. And I will make sure that we add those all to the show notes just to make it easy for folks. But Jen, this was a ton of fun. It definitely over, I thought this episode was going to be good. And then it just is even better than I thought
Oh,
it
that's
was
so
going to
nice
be.
of you to say.
So
Thank
great
you.
chatting with you. It was awesome. We're going to have to do this again, like
Yeah,
regularly.
for sure. We can just have like once a week little chats.
Yes. And then we'll have our own like Friday afternoon, like brokerage
Oh,
meetup.
yeah, love that. Love that.
Well, oh, okay, wait. Jesus, I just had one more question. Favorite
Okay,
reality
go.
show? Favorite
My
reality
favorite
show.
reality
Yeah, we're
show?
gonna end it on that.
Oof. I think right now, currently, especially because it is on right now, is Summer House on Bravo.
Are you a Southern Charm
Because,
girly?
okay, I was, but I am Team Paige DeSorbo, so
Yeah, Craig is messy. And he's
so
always has been
messy.
messy.
He's so messy, and like he doesn't appreciate a strong individual woman. So
Yeah.
go Paige.
It's like I she was so funny, like in her, she wasn't on Southern Charm all the time. But she was so funny when she would be on the show.
Hmm.
And so now we're
Her
coming up.
confessionals, perfect,
Yeah.
perfect. I strive to be that funny and that petty at the same time.
Yeah, it's been really cool to watch because I don't watch Summer House, but I know some of the people that are on it because of Southern
Hmm.
Charm. But it's been interesting to watch like who has succeeded and who kind of can do like the crossover. And I think Paige is one of the few out of both of those shows, like Paige and Craig, but even though Craig doesn't do much, he's just kind of like the face of, his sewing down
Pillows,
south
yeah,
business. But
yeah.
outside of that, he's a hot mess. And maybe he'll find what he's looking for, and that's somebody who doesn't want to work because Paige is not that. Paige is a
She is
work.
not that girl. She is a worker. We love that. Honestly, she would be if I was to have a podcast ever. She would be my like dream guest.
Oh yeah, because I mean, her podcast
100%.
is great. What the Giggly Squad, I think
Giggly
is what it's
Squad. I
called.
listen to it every week. Every week.
Oh, that's awesome.
It's amazing. It's so good.
I see the clips online all the time, and I tell myself, I'm like, oh, I need to go download it, and I just haven't done it yet. But the clips are
It's
always really good, and I'm like,
it's
this is
my it's like my hot girl walk podcast.
nice. I love it. Well, okay, that was my for real, like last question, Jen. This was awesome. I could keep talking to you for a while, but for the sake of, I guess, the listeners, we'll cut it off now, and then we'll have
Okay,
future conversations in the future. So
for
thank
sure.
you again.
Okay.